Welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Albert Cho. Russian President Vladimir Putin recently visited Mongolia, marking his first trip to a member state of the International Criminal Court, or ICC for short, since the ICC issued an arrest warrant for him last year. How will the developments of Russia-Mongolia relations impact Russia's international standing? What potential threat does this pose to China? Additionally, what developments are coming out of China-Africa Summit? Joining us today are Guo Yuren, National San Yat-sen University, Institute of China and Asia Pacific Studies Professor and Director, and Cai Rongxiang, National Zhongzhen University, Political Science Professor. A very warm welcome to both on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Putin's high-profile visit is widely viewed as a defiant gesture towards the International Criminal Courts, Cliff, Western nations, and human rights organizations, all of which have called for his arrest. Mongolia, which is positioned between the two authoritarian giants, Russia and China, has deep cultural ties with Moscow and significant trade relations with Beijing. However, by welcoming Putin at this time, it risks antagonizing Western powers and organizations. So my first question goes to Professor Guo. Why is Mongolia making this choice?
First of all, traditionally, Mongolia, as you mentioned, is in between two great powers, between China and Russia. So traditionally, Mongolians' foreign policy is equal distance between China and Russia, and try to balance both influences from China and Russia to Mongolia. So welcoming Putin's visit, of course, is a perfect match of Mongolia's traditional foreign policy. And number two, as we all know, Russia accounts for more than 95% of importation of petroleum oil to Mongolia, and more than 20% of power supply at Mongolia too. As the very bad experience last winter to Mongolia, large shortage of electricity, it is for the best of Mongolian national interest to welcome President Putin to visit, to secure continuous and stable supply of energy and also oil supply too. And number three is, again, it is Mongolians' attempt to balance rapidly increasing influence from China, especially in terms of economic development and also mineral development, including coal and copper mines.
Mm-hmm. I would like to spend a little bit of time talking about the effectiveness of ICC, and Professor Cai may jump into this question, is that we know that Mongolia is a member state of ICC. So given that Putin now is the most wanted person, so Mongolia is supposed to arrest him, once Putin arrived at Mongolia. Instead of handcuff, we saw a lot of handshakes between Putin, between the current Mongolia president, Chodoshoku, right? So would you say that the international law is not at work anymore, or any kind of difficulty for them to implementing the warrant issue?
Yeah, the thing is that Mongolia is not gonna poke the bear, because like Professor Guo said, because it exports 90% of the fuel to Mongolia. And also Russia owns half of the railroads ownership in Mongolia. So it's a landlocked country in between two giants, right? And Mongolia cannot choose its neighbors because it's stuck there. It's stuck there. Even it has joined the ICC since 2002, but sometimes the international law is very soft. It's very hard to implement that kind of decision, especially you will antagonize Russia and maybe China. So it's a trade-off. It is a trade-off for Mongolia, okay? So I don't think Mongolia can do a lot of stuff, maybe arrest Putin. I don't think it's very risky.
And also the question could be, asked again in a different perspective, which is that we know the ICC is greatly backed up by the United States. And you too mentioned that Mongolia, heavily rely on Russia for resources, for the trade relations, and so on. So can anybody argue that Mongolia does not rely on the United States for the same purposes as much?
Actually, since 2018, Mongolia's foreign policy started having a little bit reorientation or readjustment. It is called third neighbor policy, meaning Mongolians, the political elites, believes that other than Russia and China, Mongolia should outreaching to Western countries, including the United States. So this new approach actually been working quite well for Mongolia, including the formal visit of French President Macron visit last year, May. And also 2 years ago, Mongolian government signed this aviation cooperation agreement with the United States government. And also more technical military training sub-agreements as well. So all this is demonstrating Mongolians' effort try to diversify its overall national reliance on China and Russia.
But still, that new policy is not working as far as arresting Putin this time. Okay. Anyway, so let's bring another role, China, into the game. Professor Tsai, yes. Does the alliance between Russia and Mongolia pose a threat to China? We know that China also, have a close link to Russia. But what's going on between Russia, Mongolia, and China?
Yeah, the thing is that in 1990s, Mongolia was afraid of China because it's something to do with their history, especially territorial expansion. They were afraid China might have some territorial expansion to Mongolia. So they align with Russia more, okay? But nowadays, the situation is different because Russia and China, they go hand in hand, right? So it can be a relief for Mongolia because they are not gonna, they don't have to choose between Russia and China. But the thing is that, like I say, it's a landlocked country, right? So the only thing they can do, they cannot choose neighbors, but they can choose friends, like Professor Go say, right? So it's like they have third neighbor foreign policy. So they try to engage with U.S. and U.S. Secretary of State Blinken went to Ulaanbaatar, the capital of Mongolia, to meet the president. So they try to have a leverage to deal with the issue between Russia and China. Location is the tyranny of geography. Sometimes it cannot change that. But the thing is that Mongolia is a democracy. Sometimes Russia or China cannot detect everything they do in the democratic process in Mongolia. So still, that means Mongolia can have some autonomy. Still, they can have some, because like Professor Go say, it's very important they have some rare earths and lithium resources, which are so important for electrical cars, that kind of stuff. So they can sort of play some games, even they want to, of course, they want to be nice to Russia and China, but still they can make some friends with US. That's the whole point here.
Professor Go, do you agree with Professor Tsai's notion that now, since Russia get along with China, especially with regard to fighting against the United States, Mongolia does not need to choose side and can enjoy a little bit of autonomy there?
Actually, Putin's visit to Mongolia this time is actually a part of Putin's serious visit to Indo-Pacific region. As we all know, June 19th, he paid a visit to North Korea, and 20th of June, he paid a visit to Vietnam. So it is actually Putin's attempt to break through, number one, to break through the diplomatic blockade from the states and also economic sanction from the international community. And number two is, I believe Putin's having this clear intention to get closer to North Korea, Vietnam, and also Mongolia to generate kind of pressure on China in order to secure China's economic support to Russia. So when starting from 2022, Russia-North Korean relation been largely improved. With all the trouble North Korea been making, it is actually generate a lot of pressure on China. Mm-hmm. So I believe it is Putin's intention to generate diplomatic pressure surrounding China in order to secure China's continuous support to Russia.
Okay, Mongolia has attracted foreign investors with its vast undeveloped mineral resources, evolving into a small but rapidly growing free markets economy, distinct from the economic systems of Russia and China. So my next question is, can Mongolia's economy continue to thrive independently of its reliance on Russia and China? If so, in what way, Professor Tsai?
Yeah, it's very hard because 90% of the trade are exporting to China for Mongolia. So Mongolia is very dependent on Chinese economy, okay? In the meantime, the fuel, energy, it depends on Russia, okay? So there's not much they can do right now. And also for the United States, they understand this is an awkward situation for Mongolia. Okay, so the only thing they can do is like promote democracy, more engagement with the United States, and maybe they can, of course, they can play some cards, democracy cards, to work with Mongolia. But the thing is that it is very, very hard. The location is there. Okay, you cannot change this, but it's very, very tough for Mongolians to do this, especially sometimes Russia and China also try to press Mongolia to choose sides, especially the position in Ukraine war, and also China force Mongolia, maybe try to persuade Mongolia to join Global South Forum, that kind of stuff. So as a small nation, this is very, very hard, very, very tough, okay? But I think Mongolian leaders, they can find a way out in the future.
So the geopolitical factor still dominates, the foreign policy in Mongolia, obviously. When it comes to the Ukraine-Russia war, it's still persisting, but, we might see an outcome this year. If Ukraine ultimately prevails, could this outcome weaken Russia's influence over its neighboring countries, including Mongolia? If so, how? Professor Guo?
Although I do not think that will be the end game for Ukrainian to prevail over the war against Russia. But if that's really the case, I believe Russia will fall into a pretty long time of political chaos, with President Putin might step down, and Russia will become leaderless state. Just like 1991, the dissolve of Soviet Union. It actually took Russia pretty long time to recover. So if that's really the case, Ukraine prevail over Russia on the war. My prediction will be it's going to take Russia a pretty long time to recover, and Russian influence, no matter is that economically, diplomatically, or military, will shrink largely. And with this power vacuum, it is basically another strategic opportunity for China in the inner land of Asia.
So in that scenario, neighboring countries like Mongolia might enjoy more freedom to do whatever it thinks best for its country, regardless of the Russia's influence. Professor Tsai, you want to add up to the same question?
Okay, I agree with Professor Guo's opinion, because in that time, Russia will be preoccupied with internal affairs like state recovery, economic resurrection, that kind of stuff. And the war is a Pyrrhic one, because no one is the winner. When the war is over, it's like a bear that stole the honey was stung by bees. It's very pathetic, okay? And Russia won't have enough time and energy to interfere its neighboring countries like before, okay? So in that time, Russia needs China or Mongolia more than Mongolia needs China. Mongolia and China needs Russia. So if you continue the war, now it's like almost 3 years, right? And then it's not good for you, to govern this country. Yes, that's my opinion.
Okay, turning to China's hegemonic strategy towards other countries, President Xi Jinping recently attended the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, so-called FOCAC, bringing China's growing influence over Africa into the global spotlight. So we actually talk about Africa a lot in the past in the shows. My question is, in recent years, China has emerged as a major military power in Africa and has made significant investments to various infrastructure projects, including railways, bridges, stadiums, and hospitals. What strategic advantages does China's active role in Africa offer, particularly in countering the Western-led international systems?
For this China-Africa Forum, I believe the timing is a key, especially with prolong of Ukrainian war. Russian influence on African continent has been largely shrinking. Take military influence as example. Russian arms sales to Africa in the past 2 years been shrinking more than 40%. So which create the best opportunity, also the vacuum for China to step in, including military exchange, military training program, cooperation program, and also, of course, arms sales to Africa. All this is based on the foundation of China's BRI in the past 10 years. Last year, when China hosted this, the 10th anniversary BRI summit, Chinese foreign policy published this BRI Blue report, which stated that in the past 6 years, China been establishing more than 10,000 railway for Africa as a whole, more than 100,000 public road program for Africa, more than 66,000 of power supply network for Africa. So with all these, it is really the best timing, best opportunity for China to largely increase its influence and also foundation at African continent today.
Professor Tsai, would you say that this alliance between Africa and China will gradually evolve from the economic kind of link to a military or more like a security alliance in the future?
But not, yes, because China has a basis in Djibouti, right? A military base in Djibouti. And eventually they can use economic leverage to transform into military bases, stuff like that. But the current problem now is lots of African countries, they have to be default on their loans because they owe a lot of money to China. And the projects, some of them have terrible performance, okay? And it involves corruption, involves forced labors, that kind of stuff, and it's not good for local economies because China used a package to use their workers to work in Africa. So it's not good for the African economy. But the thing is that why China is the leader of Global South, or we can say a standard bearer of the development projects in African country, because it's something to do with US, the West, or the European Unions, because they leave an empty space, so China can get in and can do something. They are the leader of developing countries. That's the key issue here.
In responding to Professor Tsai's notion, initially China sought more oil and raw materials from Africa, and while these projects have created jobs, a greater share has gone to Chinese workers than to African workers. Another key point is that China has significantly benefited from its infrastructure projects in Africa. So how do you see China's investment in Africa? Is it truly a win-win situation? Professor Tsai mentioned some of them, that the credits, the African countries, maybe the national leaders thinks that China is not trustworthy anymore. But what's the calculation if we think from the perspective of African national leaders? Why do they still willing to work with China, Professor?
I believe whether it is a win-win situation, it will depending on which perspective you are taking. If you are taking the perspective from monarchy, all these African authoritarian leaders, it is win-win situation. But if you are taking the people's perspective, from the general public perspective of African nations, including societal development, including democratic development, of course, China has been kidnapping African nations by, again, infrastructure projects with economic development projects. And China has been quite try to exploit Africans' natural resources as well. And so it is depending on which perspective you are talking about. But from third-party perspective, it is pretty clear that China is increasing its grips of kidnapping of the overall development of Africa, especially with BRI projects.
Many people would argue that the widespread corruption, the systematic corruption among African countries are still there, and especially is strengthened after a lot of support from China, from CCP. That's on the one hand. That is why, probably that's the incentive for the African national leaders to accept the support from China. But also on the other hand, African people, let's say just ordinary people, probably they just do not like the judgment from the Western countries saying that, oh, you guys should walk in the path of democracy. This is the way we live, right? So maybe Professor Tsai, you can add up to this. Is it always hard for advanced countries like the United States to step in those less developed countries and point their finger at them by saying that you have to, create democracy, you have to, elect your own leaders, and is that a harder excuse for those, people in a weaker nation to accept?
Yeah, it's getting harder and harder because they have a huge debt, right? They owe a lot of money to China. According to some statistic, they owe 80 billion US dollars to China. But the thing is that they cannot pay for it. So what's the solution here? China extends, their loan period. They are not going to write off their debt because it's impossible. But the thing is that China is facing an economic downturn now, domestically, right? So they have to scale down the investment in Africa. Right now, they talk about digital skills training instead of infrastructure, real-world stuff. So that's the whole problem here, because maybe they have to maintain a relationship, but it is a burden for China now, not only for African countries. So that's the key issue here.
It's also a burden on the African country. For example, Zambia are struggling to repay high-interest Chinese loans, with some even declaring bankruptcy, right? So could the model of the Chinese aid leads to growing resentment from weaker African nations, Professor Guo?
Again, if you take in the perspective from authoritarian leaders of Africa, that would say the Chinese model is working pretty good for them. Their experience, any kind of assistance project application to World Bank usually take 3 to 5 years to get the result. But in the case of China's BRI project, you only take 3 to 5 months. And in terms of efficiency of infrastructure project, China's BRI will only take 3 to 4 years to complete the project, but it will take World Bank like 8 to 10 years, 3 times of the time to complete all these infrastructure projects for African nations. So again, from authoritarian leaders' perspective, China's model is a good model. But again, from the overall balanced development perspective, China is just trying to deeper kidnapping all these African nations.
So maybe the civil society in Africa is the final key to make African nation leaders and the people there to recognize that the real way for them to develop is, to have a more open government and less corruption. Okay, Professor Guo and Professor Tsai, thank you for your great insights today. Enjoy our show. Subscribe to Taiwan Talks. See you soon.